In 2015, a murder shocked Dallas. A woman dead, a brutal crime, but the real story is just beginning. Jealousy, obsession, and revenge. An ex-girlfriend willing to do anything. A treacherous plan, meticulously crafted. A jeep, a purse, and a murder. Who was behind this? Who would pay the price? The police didn't rest until they uncovered the truth. Get ready for a case of crimes, lies, and a thirst for revenge that ended in tragedy. This isn't just a murder. It's so much more. The story you're about to hear will surprise you. On September 2nd, 2015, Dallas, Texas, became the scene of a crime that shook the city. The body of Kendra Hatcher was found in an underground parking lot, the victim of a single gunshot. The shot hit the upper part of her body, causing her immediate death. Police were called to the scene after an anonymous tip about the gunshot, which had been heard by several people in the area. At first, the crime scene appeared to be a botched robbery, but things quickly took a darker turn. Surveillance footage revealed crucial details for the investigators. A black Jeep Cherokee was seen entering the parking lot shortly before the crime and leaving quickly after the shot was fired. The footage captured a man getting out of the vehicle and walking toward Kendra. After the shot, he quickly returned to the car and fled the scene without leaving any clear traces. A woman was also seen driving the Jeep, which caught the police's attention. This new lead made the police believe there were more people involved in the crime than initially thought. A simple robbery wouldn't explain the presence of a woman behind the wheel. The connection between the two individuals and the crime seemed to point to something more personal. The fact that the footage showed the car leaving the scene with both a man and a woman raised many questions. The investigators' work began to take a new direction as new leads emerged. Soon, the investigation focused on the owner of the Jeep, who was quickly identified. He told the police that he had lent the vehicle to Brenda Delgado, a woman whose own car was in the shop. At first, this seemed like a simple explanation, but the fact that Brenda was the ex-girlfriend of Kendra's partner raised a lot of suspicions. This discovery added an emotional layer to the crime, suggesting the motive could be jealousy or revenge. The investigators needed to understand more about this relationship to confirm whether Brenda's motive for the crime was indeed related to jealousy. The connection with Kendra's ex made sense, but the police still needed to uncover the details of this story and how Brenda was involved in the murder. Everything pointed to this not being a random crime, but a carefully planned act of revenge. The search for answers had just begun. With the lead on the Jeep, the police were able to trace the vehicle to its owner, who confirmed he had lent it to Brenda Delgado. Initially, this seemed like a simple explanation, but the fact that Brenda had an emotional connection to Kendra's ex-boyfriend made the case more complex. This detail quickly caught the investigators' attention, leading them to consider the possibility that the crime was motivated by jealousy. The relationship between Brenda and Kendra's current partner was immediately highlighted by the police. Brenda had been Kendra's ex's girlfriend, and this link raised suspicions that the crime could have been a reaction to unhealthy jealousy. This information gave the first clue that Brenda might be the main suspect. The police then focused their efforts on locating her and bringing her in for questioning. When Brenda was finally located and questioned, she seemed cooperative, but her defense didn't convince the officers. She claimed she was having dinner with friends at a restaurant on the day of the crime and provided a receipt as proof of her alibi. While her story seemed convincing at first, the evidence began to show there was more to the story than she was letting on. Brenda appeared to be hiding crucial information that could link her to the crime. The next step was to figure out who else was involved in the crime and verify the truth of Brenda's alibi. The police needed to know who had been driving the Jeep Cherokee when the murder took place, since the surveillance footage clearly showed a woman behind the wheel. This woman would be key to figuring out whether Brenda was really behind the crime or if there were other accomplices. The investigation took a more detailed direction as the police started to question who might have been helping Brenda. Brenda's interrogation didn't provide clear answers, and the authorities began to press her further. When asked about what really happened, she tried to divert the focus, suggesting that Crystal Cortez, an acquaintance, had borrowed the car that day. This immediately raised more suspicions about Crystal's role and whether she had any involvement in the crime. Brenda's story was starting to fall apart under the police's pressure. When the police interrogated Brenda about the events on the night of the crime, she gave a story that seemed solid. She claimed she had been at a Chili's restaurant, dining with a friend named Jose, and presented a receipt to back up her version. This made the police consider that her alibi might be legitimate. However, the surveillance footage still indicated that she was somehow involved. The critical point in the investigation was discovering who was driving the Jeep Cherokee when Kendra was killed. The police began to question Brenda about this part of the story, but she persistently tried to shift the attention. She mentioned that Crystal Cortez had driven the car at the time of the crime, which raised even more suspicions about Crystal and her involvement. The police wasted no time in calling Crystal in for interrogation. Brenda seemed to get more nervous with each new question, and this only increased doubts about her innocence. Her attempt to shift the focus to Crystal was seen as a strategy to hide what really happened. The investigation was beginning to show that Brenda was trying to dodge responsibility, but the evidence still wasn't conclusive. This put the police in a position of distrust. Throughout the interrogation, Brenda was unable to provide convincing answers about her presence at the crime. She seemed increasingly nervous, which led the investigators to believe she was trying to cover up important details. The pressure from the police was mounting, but Brenda insisted on sticking to her version of the events. However, her story was starting to fall apart under the scrutiny of the evidence, which didn't match her testimony. With the inconsistencies in her story, the police began to gather more evidence and question Crystal about her role. The real story behind who was behind the plot and how Brenda was involved in Kendra's death was still hidden. Brenda found herself increasingly cornered, trying to avoid responsibility, but the police were determined not to overlook the details she was trying to conceal. When Crystal Cortez was called in for interrogation, she initially tried to deny any involvement in the crime. In her version, she claimed she had been in the parking lot by chance and had witnessed a masked man fleeing after the shot. However, the security footage showed that Crystal was, in fact, driving the Jeep. This put her at the center of the investigation, forcing her to change her story. The police pressured Crystal, and under this pressure, she changed her version of the facts. Initially, she said she had been forced to participate in the crime by an armed man, but the video evidence contradicted this claim, leading Crystal to switch strategies. She then admitted that Brenda had hired her to help steal Kendra's purse, but tried to minimize her involvement. Throughout the interrogation, Crystal finally revealed that Brenda had promised her $500 to hire someone to steal Kendra's purse. However, she explained that the crime didn't go as planned, and the hired man ended up killing Kendra. Despite Crystal's attempts to shift blame, her participation in the crime became clearer. The police now had a new perspective on the case. Crystal revealed that Brenda was the mastermind behind the plan, hiring a man to commit the crime in exchange for money and drugs. Brenda wanted to get information about Kendra and her ex-boyfriend, which motivated her to create the criminal plot. However, the police suspected that the real motive was much more complex, and that Brenda's goal was always premeditated murder. With Crystal's new information, the police intensified their search for Christopher Love, the man who had carried out the crime. The connection between Crystal, Brenda, and Christopher was becoming more apparent, but the investigators needed to find physical evidence to strengthen their accusations. This was the next step in the investigation. As the truth about Kendra's death started to emerge, the investigation moved forward, and with Crystal's new information, the police were able to trace a phone number linked to the moment of the crime. This number led them to an apartment where a blue Sebring car belonging to Christopher Love was parked. This was a crucial discovery, as it directly connected Christopher to the crime. With this, the police acted quickly and arrested Christopher Love. At first, he denied any involvement in the crime, but the pressure from the investigators made him give in. During the interrogation, Christopher finally admitted that he had been hired by Brenda to murder Kendra. He confirmed that Brenda had promised him drugs in exchange for the murder. Christopher explained that it wasn't a random execution. He had been hired to kill Kendra with the goal of removing the new girlfriend of her ex-boyfriend. Brenda's motive was clear. She couldn't stand the idea of Kendra being with her ex and was willing to do anything to get revenge. This turned the case into a premeditated murder, not just a botched robbery. With Christopher's confession, the police began to understand the true scope of the conspiracy. Brenda had not only planned the murder, but had also manipulated Crystal and hired Christopher to carry out the crime. The investigation was now much more advanced, and the investigators knew the noose was tightening around Brenda. With all the evidence gathered, the police finally focused on capturing Brenda. She knew she was being hunted, and, in a desperate move, fled to Mexico. This didn't stop the authorities from continuing the search, with the FBI and Mexican authorities working together to find Brenda and bring her back to the United States. After Crystal's confession, the police focused their efforts on locating Christopher Love, the man who carried out Kendra's murder. Crystal's phone number led investigators to an apartment where Christopher's blue Sebring car was parked. This was a crucial lead, directly linking Christopher to the crime scene. When the police arrested Christopher, he initially denied any involvement. However, under increasing pressure, he eventually confessed. During the interrogation, Christopher admitted that he had been hired by Brenda Delgado to kill Kendra. The motive behind the crime was clear. Brenda wanted to eliminate her rival, the new girlfriend of her ex-boyfriend. Christopher revealed that Brenda had promised him drugs as payment for the murder. He stated that he had no personal grudge against Kendra, but accepted the job because the payment in drugs was appealing to him. This confirmed the hypothesis that Brenda was willing to go to any extreme to satisfy her desires and control her ex-boyfriend. With Christopher's confession, it became clear that Kendra's murder was not an accident, but a premeditated execution. Brenda had manipulated Crystal to help with the crime, and Christopher was the paid executor. The police now had all the pieces of the puzzle and knew that Brenda was at the center of it all. The next step was to find Brenda, who was already aware that she was being searched for. She fled to Mexico, attempting to escape the American authorities. Despite this, the police were determined to locate her and bring her back to the United States to face justice. After Christopher's interrogation, the police believed they had all the necessary pieces to bring Brenda to justice. However, she was aware of the investigation and fled to Mexico, likely anticipating her imminent arrest. This complicated matters further, but the authorities didn't give up. The FBI got involved in the search, and a murder warrant was issued for Brenda. Mexican authorities collaborated in the search, eventually locating Brenda after some time. She was arrested and taken to a detention center where she would await extradition back to the United States. However, for her extradition to happen, an agreement had to be made. Brenda would not face the death penalty in the U.S. This condition was accepted by the Mexican authorities. Brenda was finally extradited to the U.S., where she would stand trial. The extradition marked the end of her escape attempt, but also began the process of facing the consequences of her actions. Even with her escape, Brenda could not outrun justice, and now her crimes would be exposed to the public. Brenda's arrest also meant that Kendra Hatcher's case was nearing its end. The main culprits had been captured, and the police were ready to bring them to court. The case would now move to the judicial system, where the truth would be fully revealed. Brenda was about to face the gravity of the crimes she had committed. The capture of Brenda was a relief for Kendra's family, who would finally see justice served. Although the pain of the loss would never be erased, knowing that those responsible for the murder were being held accountable brought some consolation. The process was about to culminate in the trial, and justice would be done. Brenda Delgado's trial was a decisive moment in the case. Throughout the proceedings, it became clear that she was obsessed with her ex-boyfriend and willing to go to any lengths to get rid of her rival, Kendra. The prosecution presented evidence that Brenda constantly monitored her ex's emails and social media, in addition to having access to his apartment key. These details showed that the crime was premeditated and carefully planned. Brenda's defense tried to argue that she wasn't directly involved in the murder, but the evidence did not support this line of defense. Crystal Cortez accepted a 30-year prison deal and became a crucial witness against Brenda. Crystal revealed how Brenda convinced her to help with the crime by offering money to hire someone to steal Kendra's purse. This helped complete the puzzle. During the trial, it became clear that Brenda was not only obsessed with her ex, but also manipulative and calculating. She convinced Crystal to participate in the crime and persuaded Christopher Love to carry out the murder with the promise of drugs. These details reinforce the idea that the murder was not just a crime of jealousy, but a planned act with a clear intention to kill. In the end, Brenda Delgado was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would never leave prison, paying for her acts of vengeance. Christopher Love was sentenced to death, as he was responsible for taking Kendra's life. The death sentence reflected the severity of the crime he committed under Brenda's direction. Justice was served, but the impact of the crime would never be forgotten. The case of Kendra Hatcher exposed how obsession and jealousy can drive someone to commit acts of extreme violence. In the end, everyone involved paid the price for the crime, and Kendra finally received the justice she deserved. This case serves as a reminder of how love and hate can intertwine in devastating ways. This case reveals how jealousy and obsession can drive someone to commit a horrific crime. Brenda Delgado, consumed by anger and revenge, meticulously planned the murder of Kendra Hatcher, taking an innocent life. She manipulated those around her, hiring Crystal and Christopher to carry out the crime, believing she could escape the consequences. However, the evidence gathered by the police and the confessions of Crystal and Christopher shattered Brenda's narrative. Her attempt to escape with her flight to Mexico failed, and she was extradited to face justice. The trial process exposed the depths of Brenda's obsession, and justice was finally served. This case shows how a premeditated crime, driven by negative and vengeful feelings, can destroy lives. Brenda was obsessed with control and revenge, and, in trying to eliminate her rival, she ended up destroying her own life as well. The trial and life sentence of Brenda reflect the extreme consequences of her actions. The lesson of this case is clear. Jealousy and obsession can be more dangerous than one might imagine. They can lead a person to do unthinkable things, affecting lives in irreversible ways. Kendra Hatcher lost her life for a trivial and cruel reason, but at least justice was served, bringing a sense of closure to those left behind. Ultimately, this case is a reminder that, regardless of the motivation, justice will always prevail. Brenda's attempt to escape the charges failed due to undeniable evidence and the diligent work of the police. Even the most carefully planned crimes cannot escape justice.